Sorry, I'm going backwards now. Okay, I often do that, so you'll have to excuse me. All in the learning. Um, I think the point there about core values do not change quickly. Um, I think that's very true. I think it's a very, very slow process. And if you just reflect on your own cultures, you will realize how slowly they do change. Um, like I can remember a time, and certainly even before I was born, I think our country here, for instance, has changed dramatically in the last 50 years, but it doesn't feel like that at the time, and it's taken a long time. So, for example, at one point in our history, and up to very recently, we were very much influenced in this country by the Catholic Church, and it influenced a lot of how way things happened. Especially in the 1950s, it was a very restrictive country, and it took a long time to get through that culture, and for groups, certain groups, to have certain liberties, etc., that they didn't have at the time, and just ways of doing things in general, the attitude to women, and that kind of thing. So it takes a long time to change a culture, and they're very, very deep. You know, if we can think back in the Irish culture, and you can give us examples from your own cultures as well, how having been a colonial country, how we had almost a sense of a kind of a complicated history about sometimes feeling that lack of self-confidence as a country that was colonized, and that seeps into the psyche, and then that how long that takes to move on from that and to feel like a confident as a culture again, and confidence in your own culture and who you are, your identity, and all of that, you know. And also the other thing to say is that there can be subcultures in community. There can be also cultures at work. You all know that sometimes you go into somebody's office and you can feel a kind of a culture in the place. Sometimes it's a very friendly culture. Sometimes it's very awful. It often comes from the top, in you know, I find, you know. So the person at the top is very hierarchical. It almost permeates right through, you know. Whereas sometimes you've got a culture which is very bottom up. You might think about your own workplace and see what kind of culture you think you have there. You know, is it a culture that you feel you belong to, for example? So cultures can be in workplaces, but cultures can also be in where else? In subcultures. I was thinking of the Harvey Davidson, or you know, kind of, is that what it's called? The, you know, those motorbikes where there's a whole subculture around these you know, these big bikes kind of thing. And there's a language that has developed around it. There's a dress code that has developed. Um, there's symbols, there's emblems. There's all of these things that exist in some of these cultures, subcultures. And even something like different kind of communities, community groups, like even a music group can have its own culture, or a disability group can have its own culture. So groups can have their own cultures as well. I sometimes think that classes have their own culture. I saw it can be very strange sometimes. You can go into one class in a university and then to another, and how different they are, and you know how even if you change to two or three people, how the culture can change again in a classroom. So yeah, but anyway, core values don't change quickly. It's deeply rooted, like the iceberg. Okay. Um, so what I'd like you to do, if you can, is to not look at the next slide, but if you were to think of the empty iceberg, maybe draw it for yourselves, and where would you place some of these things on the iceberg? So something like crafts, language, drama, clothing, treatment of elderly, relationship with animals, religious beliefs, relationship with nature, concepts of self, understanding of the natural world, and so on. Um, Without looking at the next slide, if you could take some of those and just have a sense of where you would put some of those things on the iceberg. Which ones of those are much deeper rooted than others? And some of them get harder to place as you go down in the iceberg, I realise that. And again, it's not black and white, and it might be different in different cultures, but it's just another way into thinking about it. So here is, I'm hoping you didn't look at this, but you can have a look at it afterwards when you're, you know, in more detail. But you can see things like food, dress, music, visual arts, etc. at the top. And then things in the middle like eye contact, um, patterns of handling emotions, concepts of beauty, courtship practices is a big one. Conversational patterns, concepts of time. Some people have very different relationships with time. Being late is something that's kind of commonplace in some cultures, and the very opposite is the case in other cultures. And in workplaces, that can be actually quite challenging. Different ways in which respect and face plays out. The whole idea of face in China, for example, not losing face is a very big part of their culture. And how business gets negotiated is very much around that concept of face, which is a very different way of working than somewhere like Canada, United States, Ireland, and I think Lesotho. So you can let me know what you think of some of this. And as you go further down, deeper into the more unconscious rules, the more emotional, intense kind of areas, as is it, concepts of self, concepts of past and future, definitions of obscenity, attitudes towards dependence, problem-solving roles in relation to age, sex, class, occupation, kinship, etc. All of these things are part and parcel of what makes up anybody's culture, and they're influenced by all sorts of things. You're influenced in your culture, your family culture, you're influenced by your media, you're influenced by your schooling, you're influenced by history, you're influenced even by your environment. If you live in an island, for example, if you're in a mountainous area, you're influenced by all of these things. So many different things influence our culture. It's a complex thing. And then here's the last slide then, our reading. There's a simple explanation of Hall's iceberg model can be found there at that website. It's very, very simple, and it just really says what I just said. You don't really have to read it, but if you just wanted to have something as a handout. And there is a very good critique of it by a guy called Bennett. At the second thing there, the second website that I have given you there, that is, he's very well known, as is his wife. I can't think of her first name right now, but they're both very well known in the area of intercultural communications. But he's written a good critique, and I only put it in there for us to remember that part of our learning and preparing for third level education is to understand the idea of critique and critical thinking. We don't have to agree with everything, and there are different people who have different perspectives on all of these things. So there are people who won't agree with the iceberg model, there's other people who say it's more like an onion where there's different layers, and Bennett gives a nice kind of idea of what he thinks it is. I'm not too worried about getting into all of that right now, because this is an introductory course. I just want you to understand the iceberg model. I put it up there for anybody who's interested, and just kind of something, just to be aware of the fact that there are other perspectives on this as well. And anybody wants to read it, by all means do, and comment on it. Okay, so thank you very much. I think that's the, well, hold on a second, there's another one here. So there's a short assignment 3 for the Lesotho group. What I would like you to do, the Lesotho group, is to listen to this video, and in fact I think anybody doing this course would actually like this video. It's very, very interesting. But for the Lesotho group, to practice your English, you'll have your 200 or 300 words again, stating the points made by the speaker which you find interesting and why. Anybody is welcome to comment on it, of course, on the forum, but just in terms of the assignments that you're sending to your tutors, I want you to comment on things that you found interesting in that lecture. And I'll also have written all of this up in writing, so that on the site. Okay, so thank you very much. We've gotten through our first lecture, and it's very nice meeting you, and I look forward to talking to you on the forum. Thank you. Bye now.